Hello there, welcome to People, Politics and Power. I am Imoni Amarere. In modern democracies, constitutions have become tools for organizing relationships between state power, society, groups and individuals. It prescribes the means and methods of exercising governmental powers as well as the rights of citizens. One of such prescriptions is the process of mainstreaming gender equality into the Constitution. As one writer puts it seeks to cure the defects of the past by promoting women who have been unjustly treated in legal contemplation in relation to their male counterparts. Nigeria's National Assembly is currently in the process of the fifth alteration of the 1999 Constitution. Lawmakers in both the Senate and the House of Representatives on Constitution review had in May and June conducted public hearings across the country's 6 geopolitical zones as part of the amendment process. Major recommendations were made at the hearings, including gender inclusiveness. Nigerian women and groups made submissions on women inclusion in government and public offices, as well as gender balance in the creation and the language of the Constitution. They asked for special seats in the Senate, in the House of Representatives, and in the state houses of assembly for women because of the many challenges they encounter in entering and remaining engaged in politics. They want each state and the federal capital, Abuja, to reserve 1 senatorial seat for women, as well as in the House of Representatives and state houses of assembly. They argue that women political representation consistently declined since 2007 and therefore want 37 senatorial seats, 74 House of Representatives seats, and 108 state House of Assembly seats to be reserved for women. Over time, gender differences have been employed to justify the unequal treatment of women. This gender activists say has led to a systemic subordination and domination, and of course to exclusion of women by men. As a result, organizations and individuals that are against the unequal treatment have come forward to show their support for the gender-sensitive reforms in the Nigerian Constitution. For example, the United Nations Women, that's UN Women, works for the elimination of discrimination against women and girls, the empowerment of women and the achievement of equality between men and women as partners and beneficiaries of development, human rights, humanitarian action, peace and security. Now, one other organization that has been in the forefront of ensuring gender mainstreaming in the National Democratic Institute, NDI, which launched the Supporting Advancement of Gender Equality, SAGE. This program was launched in 2020. It is a campaign to increase women's representation in public offices in Nigeria by advocating for political and legal reforms at the highest levels. The NDI, we understand, has convened a cross-sector coalition of civil society organizations to carry out advocacy campaigns and hopefully influence stakeholders at all levels of the Nigerian society. But how far can they go and how effective can this advocacy be with just about 18 months to the next general elections in Nigeria. This is the focus of our discourse on this edition of People, Politics, and Power. We'll get to meet our guests right after now. All right, thank you so much for staying with us. Let's get to meet our guest analysts who are joining us right here in the studio. First, from my immediate left is Ambassador Medina Wise, a former Director of Cabinet and Executive Assistant to the President or former President of Liberia. She is currently Secretary General, Manu River Union. Ambassador Medina Wise, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much.
Also joining us is Dr. Chris Fomuyo. Dr. Fomuyo is the NDI Senior Associate and Regional Director for West and Central Africa. Thank you so much for joining us, Dr. Fomuyo.
Well, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be with you and your viewers.
It's good to have you again after
Thank
such
Same here.
a long break.
That's true. It's a real pleasure.
All right. So let's begin this way. Why is the gender-sensitive constitutional reform important?
Well, this is definitely an effort being undertaken by Nigerians themselves who have come to the realization that even though we're now in a democratic dispensation in this country, even though progress has been made in a number of areas, including respect for civil liberties and human rights, that there are some areas in which the country is still lagging behind. That when you compare the track record of Nigeria with other countries in the sub-region or across the continent on issues of women's participation in politics, that the country is not faring as well. And this is very surprising because you find very dynamic, creative, entrepreneurial Nigerian women in the private sector, in the liberal arts, in the professions, and even in international organizations. And they're doing extremely well. Around the elections, you also see Nigerian women turn out in their numbers. They always outnumber the men when you see them on the queues. They're very active in voting, making sure their votes count. But then when you look at the elective positions in state assemblies, in state houses, at the federal level, in the National Assembly, in the Senate, if you look at the governorships, the women are absent. And so a lot of Nigerians have been asking themselves, why can that be? Why should that be so when about 52% of the population is female? So this is a real historic undertaking by Nigerians at this moment in time when they're taking a look at the Constitution to see if there could be some reforms that will be undertaken to provide avenues for greater participation of women in politics and in leadership positions across national institutions as well as in elective positions within the legislative branch of government.
Why are the women absent? Ambassador Wise, if you look carefully, you discover that this is not peculiar to just Nigeria. Across the African continent, you can count on your fingertips how many other countries on the continent are actually in tune with what these reforms that we're talking about now. How many of their parliaments or indeed executive positions women are occupying. Why do you think this is so in Africa?
Again, thank you very much. And just to piggyback on what Chris said at the closing and to bring it to make sense to now, is at the closing he said, Nigeria is our leader. When Nigeria speaks, Africa listens. So if Nigeria takes the lead, Africa definitely will follow. If we also pick up on what Professor Jibrin Ibrahim said, there's some elements of the Constitution that perhaps some people see Constitution as literature, They read it and they pass by. But the lawyers tend to look at the words. And then, of course, social activists tend to look and give meaning. So he pointed out today in today's session that the Constitution talks about social justice, participation, equal participation. And so if we're looking at those key elements in the Constitution, then it's time to give meaning to them. And giving meaning to them, you have, I found her to be a bundle of energy in the development balance. It will be a bundle of energy. You have a person who lives a conviction, who is working with a commitment to see and effect change in the Minister of Women's Affairs. And so to be able to come today, bring all these actors, relevant political actors, together in what is a novelty, a men's conference, it means that the issue is serious and you are trying to embrace the right partners. So you are involving the men.
Involving the men, let me stay with you. How much do you think the men really want to contribute to getting the women up there? And I ask that question because in Nigeria today, almost every sector of politics, whether it is the political parties, whether it's at the local government level, state and federal levels, whether it's in parliament or in executive, is a male-dominated arena.
And so again, thanks to the statistics, thanks to the history, thanks to the flow, and thanks to the kinds of partnership that NDI has brought together, International Women's Group, to support the local group, to sort of bring out what the work, all the work that they have been doing. Yes, you were talking about a patriarchal society. Yes, you're talking about a male dominant in almost all walks of life. But again, as I see it, I think that we're embracing the whole issue of change in a very positive way. We're embracing the women, and you're embracing those elements that you know that maybe you've not put your hands on it for a while on the pulse. But now you are sensing that perhaps something is missing. And why not look at fundamentally the other half of society? And perhaps it's not even the half, it's the 52%. So why not look at the 52% who, if where it matters most is where laws are made. We could, we're talking about education of the girl child, so we are gradually, shifting the barriers and pushing and making waves. But where it matters most is where you can effect change. That is in the National Assembly. So that's why it's important that you bring the numbers to bear and you want to see this change. And I think that to have the President of the Federal Republic, President Buhari, as a lead champion, who in March, because we met with him by Zoom, and he embraced the idea. And if you start showing leadership from the top, and you're giving the support to your minister, and the minister is also in touch with the relevant stakeholders, former and current legislators, parliamentarians, women and men, to push this agenda, you are almost on the right track. And I think we'll all be very proud as we leave from here to remember September 14, 2021 as the day when it all started. So I think that's where we think that we want to give credit to the Minister of Women Affairs, Dame Talent, and her team that have been working and owning this process, because they have significant structures in place to actually take it off and push the button a little further. So I think that they're making progress.
Dr. Chris, the SAGE program or project was actually launched in 2020, and I'm just wondering why it took over 6 months or even more, almost 9 months or 10 months for this conference, the one that took place this week here in Abuja, to hold. What has been happening behind the scene before the culmination in this conference?
That's a very good question. And we have to keep in mind that when organizations such as the National Democratic Institute, NDI, and other international NGOs organize programs or co-host conferences, it's really in partnership with the national stakeholders. It's in partnership with local organizations who are already involved in these issues, who are already, by their own right, taking the lead. And so we work with them as partners to play a support role, standing behind them and not in front of them. And I can say that even before the SAGE program was launched, there were many organizations, Nigerian organizations, civil society organizations, that were very active in advocating for greater role for women in politics. There were a number of legislators who were also championing the cause. And so the value added that an organization like NDI can bring to that kind of process, which is already ongoing, is to find a way to create platforms where you can bring all the stakeholders together to rub minds, as my Nigerian brothers like to say, exchange experiences, compare notes, and harmonize their efforts, build synergies to have the proper impact. And I think the timing for this conference is really ideal, because the National Assembly is just coming back into session after recess. So the senators and the members of the House are going to be seized with this as a priority agenda. And with the Speaker and the Speaker of the House and another member co-sponsoring the House Bill 1301, which is very important legislation, that would make provisions to deal with some of the legal barriers that have impeded the access to political power for women. And it's also coming as a realization that when you look at the statistics on good governance, it clearly shows that when women are also involved in leadership positions, there's an improvement in the level of governance. There's an improvement in the delivery of public services. And so a country like Nigeria that is putting in a lot of effort to improve the well-being of its citizens, that is trying to deepen its democracy and also work for economic development, cannot afford to go into those battles with 50% or 52% of its population left out. And so it's like going into a boxing ring with one hand tied behind your back. And I think many of the political leaders, men inclusive, are beginning to see that they were selling themselves short, and it will be in everybody's advantage to open up the floodgates so that women can also get into these leadership positions, and collectively as a nation, the country can tackle some of the challenges that present themselves.
The bill you have just spoken about will deal essentially with the legal aspect of this. But
Correct.
There are definitely other aspects to getting women participate more and getting them into positions of authority, positions of influence in politics and in other sectors of the Nigerian society generally. Now, supposing, this bill says true, it gets enacted, gets signed into law by Mr. President, who happily is seized of these issues. There are other obstacles, there are other challenges. How is SAGE dealing with those other challenges, such as the cultural aspect, the religious aspects, and one or two others?
Excellent question. And we have learned from our experience in implementing similar programs in other countries that, yeah, the legal impediments are one thing, and it's always a good place to start because modern nation states in this democratic era refer to the Constitution as the bedrock of all of the other institutions that emerge in the country. So if you already can get the legal issues worked out, the constitutional framework conducive and attractive to that kind of participation, your problem is almost 50% resolved. And then you have to deal with the cultural issues and the traditional issues. And one thing that we did with the SEARCH program is that we helped identify national champions of the cause and discuss with them the possibility of forming a national working group on the issue. And we were really gratified by their generosity to willingly participate in this national working group on women's participation in politics. And you'd be impressed with the diversity of this national working group because we've got religious leaders, both Christian and Muslim, at the highest levels. We have the former cardinal, we have an imam, we have other leaders, we have traditional leaders from the north, from the west, from the east or the south. And so they are the ones that can help communicate and provide leadership in how cultures are interpreted in a way that's inclusive of all segments of our population. And it was just a wonderful moment during today's conference when the Emir of Kebbi stood up to give remarks. And his remarks were powerful because he spoke as a traditional leader. And he says, we have to look at our traditions and find what's beautiful in our traditions and see that there's nothing in our traditions that impedes our ability to tap into all the resources that are available to humankind. It's those kinds of leaders, the Oba of Calabar, who was also highly represented, it's those kinds of leaders that can help break some of the barriers on the traditional front and that can expand the space for women to play an active role in leadership in politics.
If I may come in on that,
yeah.
Just as Chris had said, it was a beautiful array, a very rich blend of the relevant stakeholder. In my previous life, I was a communications person. So I know that it's very important to identify opinion leaders, change makers, and just the natural leaders. So I think that the SAGE working group at the national level and at the international level, because I was part of the first Zoom conference while Corona was up and about, when they had the first working group to link up with the national team. It was a little bit of concern that, they were saying, no, don't speak like that. Don't talk like that now. Wait small. But today, to hear the representative of the traditional leader of Calabar say that there have been women activists. So the airport is named after a known woman activist. To hear the Emir.
Margaret Tepo.
Yes.
Margaret Tepo,
yes. To hear the Emir also speaking and giving his explicit endorsement and commitment. To hear the speaker, and he is the speaker of all the various state assemblies.
Yes, the chairman of
the chairman of the speakers.
Speakers.
He also gave a commitment. So it means that the working group, the national working group, owns this process. It means that they're doing the work effectively. It means that the bill is on the path. And what does the bill say? The summary of it is to remedy just the imbalance that you just just small, shift it. And if it passes, if and when it passes, you would see, we hope that you would see what numbers come in. And it's not only to say that the quality, definitely you bring the quality, but sometimes it's also, can be also controversial, like who measures what quality of leadership men bring to the table. But it's a reflection of the microcosm of society. And certainly the women are there, and we need to be able to embrace them.
And I just wondered, as we were talking, whether or not leaders of the various political parties are part of this entire process. Because it all begins from there. Political mobilization and participation begins from the political parties. Since Nigeria's return to democracy in 1999, we have seen a dwindling of the number of women who are put up by the political parties for elective positions, and even further, the number of those who are eventually elected into various positions. So where do the political parties come in all of this? I mean, we started with in 1999, and then the following years, affirmative action, 35% and all of that. I don't think we even have 4% now.
Again, Professor Ibrahim,
Ibrahim.
he gave a very useful context, history and social context in which all of this is going on, to suggest that there has been a social movement, there has been a historical trend towards opening up the democratic space for women to participate. But again, perhaps sometimes, the accidents of history happens, because in the Constitution, I was very active until being appointed as Secretary General, very active in the political party in Liberia. But you see that very often you push women to fight for one post, the women's wing. So, like Professor Jibrin said today, they opened the door, and by the time one woman came in, they closed the door. So now what we want is to see whether, as you involve all stakeholders, the political parties, and thanks again to President Buhari, he showed leadership by saying he was starting with his own political party to ensure that that clause is embedded in it, where you want a minimum of 30%, and you can go beyond that. Because very often, sometimes people say, oh, women only want 30%. No, you are saying a minimum. Let's start with the minimum. So if the political parties ensure that women get the symbol or the representative oath to contest political parties, we hope that you can see an increase in the overall participation of women. So definitely, because in Nigeria the laws are clear, to get into parliament you must belong to a party. So definitely that's where to go. You must go into the political parties and show that the space is not just to make sure one woman is at the table, but bring them in and see how it can work out that we can ensure that more women are active. And it's not a big secret. The common sense approach is to just be active in your community, believe in something, want to see change about something, and you can inspire so many other women at the grassroots levels.
In fact, if I may add to that, to say that you would be impressed to know that within the National Working Group are two top women from the two main political parties. The current Minister of Women Affairs is a member of the National Working Group, as well as the former Minister of Women Affairs, Dame Shiruma, who represents the PDP on the National Working Group. So both the two main political parties are represented at a very high level. And we also have a professor from Ibadan, who ran for president, who was a presidential candidate herself, who is a member of the National Working Group, and who's gone through that experience of trying to win a nomination to be the presidential candidate for her party. So this effort is really trying to make sure that the champions are empowered and that they also feel accompanied with other people being in solidarity. And that's why NDI helped put together an international working group to provide moral support to members of the National Working Group. And on the International Working Group, we have 2 former African presidents, former President Ellen Johnson Sirleaf of Liberia, former President Dr. Joyce Banda of Malawi, and we have the former president of Kosovo, Atifike Yayaga, 3 former presidents sitting on this international working group, working side by side with their Nigerian counterparts. And so we think that we're really up to something, and we're so grateful that the Nigerian people are seized with the same issue, and this partnership seems to be poised to deliver a historic moment for Nigeria and its democracy and the Nigerian people.
Will we talk about the initiatives and moves by the Nigerian women themselves in a short while? But first, Ambassador talked about if the political parties will seize the moment, if they will, on their own, accede to the minimum template of 30% and all of that. And that's a big if. I mean, going by the history of political parties in Nigeria and the way that they have treated women. These things maybe in some of the party constitutions is written. In some others, it is just a gentleman's agreement, an unwritten understanding and all of that. But year after year, election after election, we have seen situations where these written and unwritten agreements are never obeyed or adhered to. So how do we get the political parties to begin to behave in the direction that you want them to?
Well, that's one reason why having the appropriate legal framework transforms it from a gentleman's agreement into a constitutional obligation, which is enforceable, in which case parties can be held accountable if they breach the Constitution. I'm very familiar with the fact that, for example, one of the impediments that women face was the financial resources to be able to obtain nominations, to buy the nomination forms. And some parties came up and said, okay, we'll give the forms to women candidates for free. But that did not translate into genuine political support to make sure that those women who got the nomination forms for free could actually contest elections in their constituencies and win. And so it became more of a symbolic gesture than anything meaningful. And so if you now have it embedded in the Constitution, it's the law of the land. It's enforceable by courts of law. Ultimately, even INEC would have to take a position with regards to parties that don't respect that provision if it's now part of the Constitution. So in that way, you push the parties to meet their constitutional obligations, and at that point, they don't have a choice. But it's gratifying to see that even men are becoming champions of the cause, because they too realize that they've got spouses, they've got daughters that are brilliant, they've got aunties, they've got nieces, and they cannot afford to shut the door for even their own members of their own families. And we're talking biological family, but we're also talking the Nigerian family as a whole. And so that's a values question that as human beings, we should be creating opportunities for other human beings to contribute to elevating the well-being of all of our citizens.
I have not seen a copy of this bill that is now in the National Assembly. I'm just wondering whether it specifies exactly how many positions will be reserved for women for, say, senatorial, House of Representatives, state houses of assembly, local government elections and all of that. I don't know how the political parties are going to work this out and ensure that there is a balance, because from one part of the country to the other, the situation might differ. You might find situations like in Cross River State, where the Obongo Calabar comes from, where women participation have always been top-notch over time, since pre-independence era, through the First Republic, Second, Third, Fourth Republic as well. But there are other parts of the country, possibly in the northern part of the country, where that has not been the same. So how will the political parties be balancing this out?
The good thing is the law is, the proposed bill, this House Bill 1301, is very clear. The specifications are very clear. It's encouraging for one more seat throughout the Federation. So it means at least one woman from each state will be in. It's also very clear on the number of women in the House of Representatives. I think it talks about 3. Yeah. So by the end of the day, you perhaps, when the conversation gets to the public, you would hear perhaps the issue of cost. So today again, that was brought up because the bill is very clear, it's detailed, and it's well structured to say, of the 3, now going forward, of the 3 senators, at least 1 will be a woman. It doesn't say 2 must be a man. It says at least 1 will be a woman. So perhaps some states will have 3 women, but you know, so
the logistics of that is what I'm worried about.
So
because
now,
I mean, you have political parties putting up candidates against each other.
No, the law is very clear. This first one, the law is very clear. This 1 seat is for women. Let women go and contest. So here's where we need that buying in of the media and the sympathy of civil society to take the issues now to the next level. What you call cost-benefit analysis. So again, it's not a market commodity, but it's a value that you will appreciate much later. So they're saying it will cost 12 billion naira. Some people say, why? So just bring some women to come and make noise. No, no, no. Don't look at it that way. Look at the long term, that now you are reviewing the social order. And it's important to include that half that you have left behind, or that 52%. So as you're saying, in some states, it's like how are you talking about women to rule what? But the good thing is also we are buying in with the traditional leaders. So where women were not in the forefront of leadership, especially political leadership, this bill would encourage that. Minimally, 1 would come forth. So we will take it forward. Minimally, additional 3. So it's this addition that most times we have not been so bold to want to say, let's put additional resources for something that is priceless, something that brings this new value, and let's see this experiment that we all want to see, how we can heal. Nigeria has many problems, and yet we see that the women have been taking up some leadership roles in some instances, quietly quenching some fires, in some instances, taking the bull by the horn and bringing the bull back home. So it doesn't mean, you know, you have to sit. And because women are that many number in the population, bring them in. You will appreciate the value over time. So it's not that you bought the shirt today, you must wear it, and you say, oh, somebody sees it and says fine, and he says fine. But you will see over time this, and the ownership of this process would be well seen. The the commitment that you have now in this, where the Minister of Women's Affairs is, I mean, like I said, I found it just useful that people saw her as indefatigable, because that's a bundle of energy to be looking for all these stakeholders. Let's come together. To have such a conference as you've had today, that's phenomenal. And because the room bubbled with energy, it was like, oh, can we take this now to the state level? Perhaps that's where NDI and the local partners will be saying, you know, I think that it's a good idea. We've had the first one in the federal capital, so let's take it to the next level. And let's, the same kind of energy that you bring in, it doesn't have to be sequential, it can be going on consecutively. Let's have this going on. Let's shape and reshape the conversation and reshape the dialogue. So then we're not like, oh, do we have enough women? We are part of you anyway. We're here.
So Dr. Chris, this is likely going to be a long distance race. Looking at the proposal that some of the women groups have put forward, we have 36 states in Nigeria. So a minimum of one female senator from each of the 36 states would then be giving us, say, 36 senators, for instance. And then 1/3 of the 360 members of the House of Representatives will be giving us something in the region of 74, 75 members of the House of Representatives. Yes. Now, the decision, or rather the proposal to take this dialogue to the state level, is it to also conscientize the leadership of the political parties, the traditional rulers, the religious leaders, and the ordinary people, men and women, at that level?
Yes, it is. And you have to keep in mind that because this has to do with a constitutional amendment, that when it passes the National Assembly, both houses, the House of Reps and the Senate, then it has to go to the states for ratification. And so you want to make sure that at the state level, people are also seized with the issue, so that when it comes the turn for the states to make their pronouncements and take a vote on ratification, that they can ratify very quickly. I'm also I can also draw from the Nigerian experience with the Not Too Young to Run. You may remember there was also a campaign to lower the age requirements as a way of incentivizing young Nigerians to engage in the political process and to seek elective office. And once there was a national engagement, a national movement, and a conscience raising or an awareness raising at the national level that needed to be done, the bill passed through the National Assembly very quickly. The president signed it. It went into the states. Enough states ratified it, and that happened. And we saw even in the last national elections that a lot of young people actually put their candidacies forward, which is very refreshing. So Nigeria has done it before for the youth. It can do it again for the women. I would also say that the numbers that you just shared with us are a worthwhile investment. They are a worthwhile investment, because if you look at comparatively across Africa, Nigeria is 200 million people. To have a Senate of, let's say, 150 senators.
109.
Yeah, right now it's 109. So if you put on 36, for example, just hypothetically, it gets you to 145, for example. That's still a manageable number for 200 million people.
That would be an addition to the current constitutional provision.
Sure, but
which makes it 3 senators per state.
Yes. So what I'm saying is that even in that kind of configuration, 145 senators for 200 million people is still manageable. Because you go into a country like the Democratic Republic of Congo, for example, they've got 500 deputies, and they're not even half the population of Nigeria. And you know, the essence of governance is to get elected officials as close to the citizens as possible. And so as the population of the country grows, you know, the needs of Nigerians today far outpace the needs of Nigerians 20 years ago, or, you know, close to 30 years ago when the Constitution was adopted in 1998, 1999. And so that kind of thinking is also very innovative. And it sends a very historic message to the citizens that we are paying attention to your needs. And if it requires expanding the institutions to have more better representation, then it's worth the investment. Because I even say, you know, issues of some of the other issues which we may see as separate from the issue of women's engagement are very intertwined. And the ambassador was making the point a short while ago, even on issues of security, issues of insecurity. You know, when people look at the picture of the country in terms of its leadership, when you frame a picture and you have it on your wall, your family portrait, with all the faces of your spouse and your kids and your parents and grandparents, when your kids stand up and they look at that picture, they see all the faces of the family. They respect that wall picture. But if 52% of the picture of the population or of your family look at the family portrait every morning and they don't see their faces in that portrait, you know what that means in terms of their attachment to the national character of the country. And so, you know, I know my Nigerian brothers and sisters talk a lot about the national character. This is one area where that investment needs to be made so that every morning when Nigerians wake up and they look at their National Assembly, they see the faces of all Nigeria in there. They look at, in the states, even in the local government areas, they look at the chairmanships, they see the faces of their community represented all in there. It gives a sense of belonging, and that is a worthwhile investment for any country. I know that, and I'm very impressed with the way that the legislators have drafted this legislation, because Nigeria has the particularity of single-member constituencies. And we all acknowledge that when you're dealing with single-member constituencies, it's sometimes difficult to implement measures like this. In countries like Rwanda or even Senegal, that's next door, where they use proportional representation, for example, they can say that if you have a list of candidates, the second or the third slot must go to a woman. And it makes it easy for parties. So if they go into a district and they have 6 seats or 9 seats, then they can do the 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, and everybody fits in. But because Nigeria has single-member constituencies, you have to come up with legislation that takes cognizance of that fact, but creates an opening, as is the case in the draft legislation, in the bill, that says there will be this one slot for which women from all sides can contest. That's one way to guarantee that nobody feels that anything is being taken away from them. You're not taking anything from the men who are already elected or who aspire to be elected. You're just creating additional opportunities so that those who have been left behind can also have an opportunity to be elected and to participate in the governance of the country.
But like you put it, that would be an expansion of the number of representatives at the different legislative chambers, as it were. And I'm wondering whether that will not be a very difficult sell to Nigerians at this point in time, at a time when, in fact, many Nigerians think that the number of representatives at the federal level, especially the House of Representatives in the Senate, are too many, and that it's a big drain on the national economy. And then you want to add some more to that. I don't know how sellable that would be.
I think, you know, one of the beauties of a democracy is that when legislation is being debated, that members have the opportunity to air their concerns and to have those concerns looked into. That for legislation, it's always a cost-benefit analysis to see what the cost is or what the costs are, but also what the benefits are. And in this case, the point is that the costs are worth the investment. That if you do a per head count in terms of one senator for X number of citizens, you would see that the representation is so tiny that it makes it extremely difficult, even for the 3 senators per state, to actually represent their constituents appropriately. How many senators actually go out into their constituencies and hold town hall meetings and have one-on-one meetings with their constituents to be able to take their concerns and integrate them into legislation that's being drafted? So if an investment needs to be made to broaden the space for participation, I think that it's a worthwhile investment because it will pay dividends in a whole host of other areas.
And maybe just to add one more other thing that this exercise might lead to is you would see the smaller parties coming up, because you hear often that there are several other parties in Nigeria, but we only see PDP and APC. So what this would inspire the smaller parties to do is to work where they know they are best strengthened and with the network. So you would see women, because you are saying by right to participate you must belong to a political party. So once again, this would be another form, another dividend, an unintended consequences but a beautiful one, to say that perhaps you'll see women coming up from different corners of the country, bringing to the mosaic, the national mosaic, the federal mosaic, different colors, different values, different attributes. So this is opening up the space that you should want to see how, because we haven't seen them. So what are they doing? Let's look for them. So this is the this is the whole exercise.
All right, thank you so much, Ambassador and Dr. Fomuyo. It's been a very beautiful time with you. I've enjoyed this conversation, and hopefully we should push it further some other time. But for now, we must go. Thank you so much for your time. Dr. Chris Fomuyo is the NDI Senior Associate and Regional Director for West and Central Africa. Thank you so much for coming. And Ambassador Medina Wise, former Director of Cabinet and Executive Assistant to the President of Liberia. She's currently the Secretary General of the Manu River Union. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for having
Well,
us.
that's our program for today. Please join us again when we bring you a fresh edition of People, Politics, and Power.